In December of 1903, something really remarkable happened. Anybody know what happened in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17th, 1903? Orville and Wilbur Wright, bicycle mechanics, took to the heavens, well, to the air, not too far off the ground, in a 12-second flight that traveled 120 feet. And if you want to get a sense of how long 120 feet is, it's the distance from this window wall to the window wall on the other side of the museum. That's it. A 12-second flight, 120 feet. It changed the world. We were getting around in horses and buggies at the time, and for the first time in human history, we flew like the birds. That dream of generations came true. We flew like the birds in a heavier-than-air vehicle that carried a human being, that had wings, that control surfaces so that you could steer, you could control the direction of the vehicle, and it had an engine to keep it going for sustained flight. We flew like the birds, and we were never the same again. In 1927, now let me, by the way, back up and say that I think the best way to say, to describe this museum is to say that this is a sacred place where you're standing right now with regard to human dreams of flight in air and space. And the most remarkable gallery in this museum, the centerpiece of this museum, is the Milestones of Flight gallery, which you're standing in right now. And in 2000 and, well, it was still 2003, before December 17th, a few months before that, I believe, the Wright Flyer, the first airplane that ever flew, was hanging right here. And I could have a get-together like this for a family science night program. I did. It was actually December 17th, 2002, on the 99th anniversary of the first flight of the Wright brothers. And I asked a group just like this, where is the first airplane that ever flew? And everybody looked at me and they didn't understand, where it might be. And they said, well, is it Kitty Hawk, some other museum? And a little girl sitting somewhere over here pointed up, and everybody started looking at this machine. And I said, is it real? And everybody said, no. And I said, yes, it is. This is the National Air and Space Museum. And for the 100th anniversary of powered flight, it was given its own gallery. That's why it's not here anymore. It's up there on the second floor when you can move around the museum a little later. Go see the first airplane that ever flew. It's in a gallery called the Wright Cycle Company, right? Wright Cycle Company. And so in 1927, keeping with the stories in this gallery, Charles Lindbergh did something. Anybody know what Charles Lindbergh did? The first person, all by himself, to travel nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris. And he did it in the spirit of St. Louis, and he was responding to a challenge. A man by the name of Ortig said, I'll give $25,000 to any person to be the first to travel across the Atlantic, New York to Paris nonstop, and many tried, but he was the first to do it. And when he came back to New York, over 1 million people lined Broadway and gave him a ticker tape parade. Why? It had never been done before. Where's the Spirit of St. Louis, the plane that he flew? Is it real? Yes, it is. As far as I know, the only thing that was done to that plane since it came into this museum is it was dusted. And he took off from Long Island, New York. They didn't even know if he would be able to take off carrying all of that fuel. He didn't have a parachute. He didn't have a radio. More weight. Why even bother? But he came back to New York, and the world was galvanized with what he did. How many of you have traveled across the Atlantic Ocean? On business, on a vacation? You go across the Atlantic Ocean, you board your nearest international airport, you get into the air, and as the mighty Atlantic Ocean is moving across underneath you at about 600 miles an hour, you're doing a crossword puzzle. You're watching a movie. You're talking to a friend. You take it for granted. Why do you take it for granted? Because he was the first. And he opened up commercial aviation. What he did so galvanized the human imagination across this planet that companies raced in to try to figure out how they could make money selling commercial aviation tickets, getting airplanes, building airports, so that when you go from point A to Z the next time you board an aircraft, or when you go back home, thank him. Thank him.